What's up, guys? This is Kung Fu Prepper. I have an urgent message I want to share. It's the message is from Canadian Prepper, which he is interviewing a scientist. I'm not going to pronounce his name. You're going to hear his name once I show the video. It's a very urgent message it's from Canadian Prepper. He's interviewing a scientist again, and I want everybody to give thanks to him for doing this because he's been Canadian Prepper has been doing a lot. I mean, thank you, Canadian Prepper. We don't even have words for it, but yes, thank you for this message, and I'm about to relay it right now. So this is an urgent message. Everybody needs to hear. Everybody in the world, around the world, needs to hear. Here we go.
We've never experienced a collapse of industrial civilization. We don't know with certainty how it plays out. That dramatic increase in global average temperature is going to influence everything that grows around us. Humans are definitely included on the list of species that are teetering on extinction right now. I have complete confidence that there won't be a human being on the planet in 2030. Informed people have known about this for a long time. They're all asking us, the masses, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But at the same time, I don't see them doing that. They all are interested in the same thing. That's keeping you and me in the dark. We're more concerned about retaining privileges for the wealthy than we are about retaining habitat for human animals on Earth. That's just an indication of how insane this world has become.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. I got a very special guest on the channel today, Professor Emeritus Guy McPherson, not Guy McPherson. You see, the problem here in Canada is we had this hockey player named Guy Lafleur, and so every time I see that...
So the scientist's name is Guy McPherson, and this is not for fearmongery. You can use this on your own terms or your own knowledge. And again, this is something I believe that you need to hear. Here we go. Let's continue.
Word now, I think Guy, but it's Dr. Guy McPherson. He is Professor Emeritus of the University of Arizona. He studied natural resources, ecology, and evolutionary biology, published 55 peer-reviewed research papers. Now, as far as I know, and I could be mistaken, he's never had a dinner date with George Soros. He's never attended the World Economic Forum, but I could be wrong. And I don't think he's ever attended the Bilderberg Group, but I don't know, maybe, am I on the right track here, Guy?
You're exactly right about all three of those statements.
All right, perfect.
I'm not nearly as important as I think I am, apparently, so I don't get invited to a lot of meetings.
Right on. Well, you've been thoroughly vetted then for my audience, so you've been given the pass. Since we last spoke, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was either 2018 or 2017, we've had record-setting wildfires around the world, especially here in Canada. We've seen droughts on every continent. We have seen biblical flooding, especially in the west of Canada. We've seen heat waves that I've never before seen in my lifetime. It touched 54 degrees here in BC last year, and the town where it was registered burned down the day afterwards.
It's a good thing they got that recording before they burned down.
Yes, it's otherwise we never would have known, right? We've had a pandemic, we've had an energy crisis, we've had a financial crisis, and of course now we're on the cusp of World War III. So my question to you, Professor, is how much time do you think we have left?
Yeah, I get asked that almost every day, and I am certain that we will lose habitat for human animals shortly after we have an ice-free Arctic Ocean. Now, an ice-free Arctic Ocean was projected to occur in 2018, plus or minus 3 years, in one of the most renowned and conservative peer-reviewed journals, the Annual Review of Earth and Planetary Sciences. So I'd say we dodged a few bullets. We will not have an ice-free Arctic this year, according to a forecast by the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. And that seems to be quite reliable in its 6-month ensemble forecast. So I think we dodged that bullet this year. Now, there are of course, a few other things that can cause loss of habitat for humans too. And the peer-reviewed literature already indicates that we are losing habitat for vertebrates and for mammals around the world. So I'd say we're close, but naming a specific day, I have complete confidence that there won't be a human being on the planet in 2030. I have indicated that 2026 is likely to be loss of humans as well. And I'm certain that we will lose habitat by then if the peer-reviewed papers I cite are correct. Now, I would love for them to be wrong, obviously, right? I don't want to die, much less have our whole species go extinct, because the rapid rate of environmental change in the wake of our extinction spells disaster for every species on Earth. As a conservation biologist, I'm no fan of the mass extinction event in which we are in the midst, much less the loss of all life on Earth accompanying human life. So, you don't come to me for good news, obviously. And it looks like the news is increasingly bad because the underlying data are increasingly bad. But it is what it is. So I will keep informing people to the best of my ability what is going on in the world and trying to interpret the scientific evidence underlying what's going on in the world, because that's what we can do, right? We're like medical doctors. Through the 1960s, it was considered perfectly appropriate for medical doctors to not tell their patients they had a terminal diagnosis. And now we think that's crazy. Finally, the medical community awakened to the fact that a dying person deserves to know that they are dying and that it's going to happen soon or in months or years or whatever, right? And so that's why I play the role I do now as a science educator, trying to inform people that we don't have long, and you might want to let that influence the way you live your life.
Interesting. So maybe you can explain exactly why an ice-free Arctic would lead to, the collapse of civilization. I mean, I understand the science, but maybe my audience doesn't.
In the journal Science, which is among the top 2 peer-reviewed journals in the world, along with Nature, I can't remember the name of the professor who reported that the Arctic is the planetary air conditioner. But that's the short version right there. When we lose Arctic ice, we lose all of that albedo or reflectance that is being provided by the ice and snow floating on the Arctic Ocean. The ongoing rate of environmental change is faster than at any time in planetary history, according to the IPCC, the very conservative Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And yet, the environmental change in the wake of loss of ice in the Arctic will be even faster. It's difficult for me to imagine humans, as the large vertebrate mammals we are, being able to keep up with that sort of environmental change. In fact, there is abundant evidence indicating that tardigrades, the go-to source for all of us who want life to persist in our wake, that even tardigrades can't keep up with the current and projected rates of change. And if we lose tardigrades, it's not going to be a pleasant Earth to live on.
So the reflectance of the Arctic sea ice, without that reflectance and without that planetary air conditioner, the oceans heat up. Because I know that the Arctic is heating at, 3 to 4 times the rate of the equator. So I'm looking at these diagrams on the Arctic Sea Ice Analysis website frequently, and I noticed that, the one measure that they're using is sea ice extent. Obviously, we need to take into account density as well. So some people have been skeptical about the real numbers with respect to, what those analyses are registering. What do you think about that?
Right. First of all, a comment. We're talking about going from this to this. And so you can imagine the high reflectance from this is going to be matched by high absorption from this. So it's really an enormous factor. Now, it is critically important to evaluate the volume as well as the extent. But it's the extent that provides the reflective surface. Certainly, we have lost an enormous amount of volume. The ice on the Arctic Ocean is thinner than it's been throughout the satellite record. And that makes that ice particularly vulnerable to things like storms that get up into the Arctic, to the ongoing rate of planetary heating. And that's undoubtedly why the Arctic is warming up 3 or 4 or maybe 5 times faster than the rest of the planet. So volume is critically important because it serves as the long haul for aerial extent. It's aerial extent that provides the reflective surface and the amount of reflective surface. And how long that extent remains depends critically upon the volume and therefore the density. So you're right. They're both very important. I've been focusing lately on the extent because the volume is so low at this point. The density is so low at this point that it seems to me if we can hold on for a little while longer with respect to reflectance, we're doing great.
So how exactly does this play out? I know that the Arctic plays a critical role in the jet stream strength and regulating the temperatures that we've become accustomed to around the planet in order to that we base our agricultural system around. How exactly do you see this unfolding? Because I mean, it's a pretty bold prediction to say that by 2030 there'll be no humans. So that would entail a massive agricultural collapse and obviously a lot of social upheaval. How do you see that taking shape?
Yeah, that's a good question because we've never experienced collapse of industrial civilization. We don't know with certainty how it plays out, right? We can postulate based on past events, but it's pretty tough to say exactly on a day-by-day, week-by-week, month-by-month basis what's going to happen. Bear in mind that loss of habitat is already underway for vertebrates and mammals, and it's projected to get much worse in the near future. As large vertebrate mammals, humans are definitely included on the list of species that are teetering on extinction right now. Habitat for humans is rapidly being lost right now in tropical and subtropical areas because of the lethal wet bulb conditions. The combination of high temperature and high humidity in the tropics and subtropics make it an extremely dangerous place to live at this point. Among the consequences of a warming planet is the inability to grow, store, and distribute grains at scale. And unfortunately, such activity defines civilization, this one and the civilizations before ours. I suspect the ongoing military misadventures in Ukraine are driven at least in part by access to the grains in the region, which are numerous. And it doesn't really matter what you eat as an individual. What's important is what goes on at the planetary level, because if we lose as little as 20% of industrial activity, we're going to see a rapid warming of the planet of a degree or so, and that will further negatively impact the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale.
Can you explain that process? I know a lot of my audience is probably not familiar with the global dimming effect, and exactly how rapidly would that have to happen for that to actually unfold?
It's something that almost nobody talks about. You'd be hard pressed to find a paid climate scientist or a media personality or a government official mentioning global dimming or the aerosol masking effect. But here's the thing. At the same time industrial activity puts up carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that I think we're pretty much all familiar with at this point, at the same time, industrial activity also puts up these aerosols into the atmosphere. Those aerosols act as something of an umbrella or a series of mirrors that reflect incoming sunlight before it strikes Earth, and therefore before it has the potential to heat up the Earth and get trapped by those greenhouse gases. So if we can stop incoming sunlight from striking Earth and therefore warming Earth, then that's going to serve as a cooling mechanism. And it is. The latest paper I've seen from Nature Communications, which is open access, so anybody can read the paper, indicates that we will see a 33% increase in planetary temperature and 133% increase over land. Now, most of us live on land, obviously, so that dramatic increase in global average temperature is going to influence everything that grows around us. right? That influences your ability to grow a garden. That influences every living organism out there, because organisms have evolved through natural selection in response to certain selective factors, and those include an almost perfect match to the environment where they're found. We are unusual relative to other organisms. We are capable of modifying our own environment and also protecting ourselves against things like cold and too hot, that sort of thing with technology. But we depend greatly upon other organisms for our own survival. And if you don't think that's the case, just have a conversation with a few species in your stomach after you've been, say, drinking too much or eating too much of the wrong thing. And when you get back off the toilet, tell me how those species are not important, because they really influence our comfort. And I've been having intestinal difficulties myself today. I can assure you that it makes life extremely uncomfortable. I wasn't sure I was going to make this conversation today.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to have that conversation with them and got everything straightened out before we met here. So this global dimming effect, then, this aerosol masking effect, you said in June 2021 there was a publication that said that 133% increase in land temperature, and is that with an abrupt downgrade? That's with 20% in reduced industrial activity?
Right. Yes. As little as a 20% reduction in industrial activity based on other peer-reviewed papers leads to sufficient loss of aerosol masking that it'll warm the planet. I have the full details on that paper in Nature Communications. Again, it was published June 15th, 2021, and it's an open access journal, so anybody can go to the website of Nature Communications and find this paper from June 15th, 2021. It's called Significant Underestimation of Radiative Forcing by Aerosol Cloud Interactions Derived from Satellite-Based Methods. So they're pointing out that the previous work on aerosol masking, or what they call radiative forcing, has been profoundly underestimated, and they demonstrate how and why that's the case and point to that 133% increase in global average temperature over land.
So this would basically, sorry, go ahead.
James Hansen, Professor James Hansen, who we all know worked for NASA for many years, and he's sort of the father of climate science, he says those aerosols fall out within 5 days of a reduction in industrial activity. So they fall out quickly. The planet warms up very quickly in response, because what we're talking about here is loss of that umbrella or that series of mirrors, and immediately the planet begins warming up. So he says as little as 5 or approximately 5 days. So that's not a long time. I suspect we lost a significant amount of aerosol masking when the pandemic was reaching its peak, and the evidence for that has been appearing in peer-reviewed literature. Things such as, for example, profound increases, record-setting increases in precipitation in places like around Wuhan in China, and also in Western Europe. So and most recently in the northeastern United States. So in the places that the pandemic broke out first and greatest, there was sufficient regional reduction in aerosols to cause increased warming and therefore increased precipitation. As climate scientists have been saying since the 1970s, a warmer Earth is a wetter Earth, because as it warms, more water is evaporated, goes up into the atmosphere, and that seeds the clouds, if you will, so that there is increased moisture that's able to come down to Earth. And so that's why we're seeing things like at the same time the Colorado River is on the verge of drying up. At the same time, the Po River in Italy has already effectively disappeared. We're also seeing places that there is increased precipitation, increased flooding. So, we don't have a lot of choice, but depending upon where we live, we're getting really arid conditions, as is occurring here in New England, and very rapidly, or we're getting very wet conditions because the whole general circulation patterns of the planet have been disrupted by planetary overheating as a result of anthropogenic emissions.
Yeah, I like the term climate disequilibrium to explain that. So just so people can wrap their head around this, because it's paradoxical to think that unless we keep pumping or keep the coal plants running, keep the natural gas, electricity power plants running, that we will actually effectively heat up the planet faster. So a person might ask then, what is the solution to this problem from your perspective, or is there one?
I don't think there is one. I think this is a classic predicament. We can go to great effort to reduce emissions, and that's what paid scientists are asking us to do. Paid climate scientists, government officials, and so on. They're all asking us, the masses, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But at the same time, I don't see them doing that. I see Michael Mann going on television and telling people to reduce their emissions right before he takes a flight to Australia, right? And so that's sort of I talked with a friend I haven't met yet. She's a personal assistant for a billionaire in Switzerland. And she said when he gets taken somewhere in his personal jet, he's not flying the thing. But when he is taken there, he takes two personal jets. One is the lead jet, the Scout, to make sure if there are any air pockets that the jet he is on doesn't hit those air pockets, because he doesn't want to be discomforted by a little rapid change in elevation. Wow. So I don't see folks like that giving up any sort of privilege to reduce emissions. That's why we are told that we need to reduce emissions. But if we do that to too great an extent, and this is why I stopped living off grid. I lived off grid for more than 10 years because I thought it was the way to provide a solution for planetary overheating. But then I found out the full effects of the aerosol massing effect, and I go, if people actually followed my lead, we'd all be dead by now. Yeah. So fortunately, nobody pays attention to me.
And it's one thing that really stands out with what you're saying is, like, regardless of what happens, is this maintenance of privilege, because we hear all the time the wealthy and the people hypocritically. And this is I think why people are so skeptical of a lot of this stuff, is because they hear all these rich people who are using way more energy than them, telling them that they need to use less. Now, if all of these guys and Leonardo DiCaprio said, hey, I'm going to move out to a yurt and I'm going to live in a tiny home and I'm going to actually practice what I preach, I think a lot more people would be inclined to actually follow their lead and be less skeptical. But like you say, in the future, and I've been listening to a lot of discussions about, peak energy. People who obviously have a larger access to resources and are in a more privileged position, they can use more energy. So really the mark of privilege is how much energy do you consume. So if we move into this future where, we all have to ration our energy, there's going to be some people who just simply don't have to do that. I've speculated that there might be some kind of, dystopian carbon credit system where if you're really rich, you can buy the carbon credits off poor people and then you can pollute more, or, something like that, like what we have now with industrial activity with carbon credits, but on an individual scale or level.
Instead, the rich people just take those carbon credits from the poor people.
Yeah, exactly, right? And of course, we live in a debt-based society, and there's all the financial ways that the poor have their wealth extracted by inflation and all those things. But
and it's so much worse. I only recently, within the last few months, ran across this quote from John Kenneth Galbraith, who's a Canadian-American public figure. And this is from his 1977 book, The Age of Uncertainty. Quote, people of privilege will always risk their complete destruction rather than surrender any material part of their advantage. That's right. As nearly as I can tell, the rich people want to maintain their riches, retain their privilege-filled life cycle, and they're not willing to give up a thing in support of, future generations on this planet or whatever.
Yeah, because they want to maintain that edge relative relatively speaking, no matter what it looks like. And this is why I've always suspected that if there was a major catastrophe on the horizon, in the same way that the Fed has said, don't worry about inflation, and the same way Biden said, don't worry about Afghanistan, and, when they originally said, don't worry about the pandemic, and, all these things, I suspect that we'll be led down the same path with this climate situation. If it is as bad as you say it is, I don't think they would go out of their way to make it publicly known, we'll say. And they may even set up, and when I say they, that sounds a little conspiratorial, but I guess I just mean there's this, in academia in particular, there's a lot of pressure, I think, like you said, financial pressures or whatever the case. Like, well, what do you think is motivating? Why are you the only guy saying this? And are there other people saying this stuff?
Well, it's pretty interesting because I didn't know about aerosol masking at all. And then I stumbled across a paper by James Hansen and half a dozen or more colleagues, I can't remember, in December 2011. And by this time, I was already living off-grid and had been for 3 years. And so I thought I was doing the right thing, making this personal sacrifice, spending $1 million to create this homestead and giving up well over $1 million in wages, that sort of thing. And then I come across a paper, and in the paper twice it says this is the first time anybody has estimated aerosol masking. And so I actually believed it. Then I came across a person who has become a friend, and he was a longtime librarian at various colleges and universities. And he wrote to me and said, there's more than 24 papers that have described aerosol masking before that December 2011 paper came out. And so he'd point me to some of those. The oldest one I've been able to find is from 1929. And the level of aerosol masking in 1929 was almost exactly the same as measured by Hansen and colleagues in 2011. So that tells me, since wealthy people tend to be very well informed, that a lot of people knew about aerosol masking for a long time, and we just weren't told about it. And I think that's because there's this delicate balance between conservation, retaining privilege by retaining access to fossil fuels, and it's a zero-sum game, right? Any natural gas that you don't use gets used by a billionaire. Any oil that you don't use gets used by a billionaire. So we don't want you using any fossil fuels, or me. We want to save that for the wealthy people. That's the sort of message that I've been coming to and concluding over the course of the last few years. It's on the one hand terribly sad, and on the other terribly Machiavellian, and neither of those surprises me at this point.
So what do you think the plan then is of people who may be in the know, if they know that it's futile, and if they agree with what you're saying, what would their plan be then to ride this out?
I think the plan at this point is to maintain industrial activity at or approximately at the current level. Bear in mind that we've burned more fossil fuels in the last 25 years than in the history of the industrial age prior to that point. So we got the pedal to the metal, and informed people have known about this for a long time. What are we going to do? What are they going to do? I think they're going to keep the pedal to the metal. I think the billionaires are going to retain their privilege as long as they can. And when it's done, it's done. Again, I think that's one of the reasons we're involved in what is emerging to be World War III. Access to grains, access to fossil fuels. The longer we can hold this set of living arrangements together, the longer those people are going to enjoy their privilege. And I'm talking about government officials, as well as paid climate scientists and media personalities. They all are interested in the same thing. That's keeping you and me in the dark so that they can maintain their privileges for as long as possible, given what's coming. And then what happens? I don't think there's a bunker way out of this, because we lose aerosol masking and we lose ice in the Arctic Ocean, and that almost certainly leads to a near-term global average increase of at least 6 degrees C. And that 6 degrees C, according to a peer-reviewed paper by Strona and Bradshaw in the November 13th, 2018 issue of Scientific Reports, indicates that a 5 or 6 degree increase in global average temperature will drive to extinction all life on Earth. All life on Earth. And that means all the organisms that support our living on Earth, all the pollinators, all the decomposers, all the things we call food, no matter what we eat, plants, animals, or some combination of the two. Informed people surely know about this, but I never hear about it. For that matter, the IPCC has concluded in 2 separate reports that climate change is abrupt and irreversible, more abrupt than any time in planetary history, and quite irreversible as a result of self-reinforcing feedback loops being triggered. And those reports came out in 2018 and 2019. I don't hear anything about them. It's like they came out, some things they like Elon Musk and Twitter, that's worth all day news every day, forever apparently. But this is the important stuff, is abrupt irreversible climate change. Why don't I see a media personality talking about it ever? It just went away.
Well, I guess it's not profitable if, there's not a solution that can be marketed and
Right.
To the masses.
And so I'm convinced along those lines. There's a professor named David Keith at Harvard, and he's been promoting this idea that he came up with of spraying, I think, sulfates into the sky. But that would have to be repeated every few days or every few weeks. We don't know because we haven't done it yet. To maintain or reduce the planetary temperature, it would have to be done very, very frequently. And when he came across the idea by one of his co-workers at Harvard's Rolling Institute, Dr. Ye Tao. Dr. Ye Tao came up with this idea of using mirrors to reflect the sunlight before it hits Earth. And this is a very durable solution. It would have to be done once every however long the mirrors last, right? 20, 30, 40 years. And then think about...
Sorry, guys. We ran out of time. We'll continue the next segment of the video next time. Stay tuned. You guys, don't forget, get your preps going, get your water, your resources, your food, your means of protection. Start prepping endeavorly. Guys, get your butter from a duck and water from a dry river. Remember, stay vigilant, stay aware, and stay tuned. This Kung Fu Prepper out. Until next time.